I thought my husband was making me healthy morning smoothies. Then my 16-year-old daughter hacked his safe and found a spreadsheet tracking the exact poison dosages he fed me. I sat in a sterile computer lab staring at the screen and vomited until I tasted copper. But to understand how my teenager built a murder case, I need to take you back. Topic Chapter 1. I never thought a piece of mail could make my blood run cold at 71 years old. But here we are. It arrived this afternoon in a heavy manila envelope. I'm sitting alone in my kitchen in Alpharetta. It's 2014 a.m. The house is completely silent. Only the hum of the refrigerator is keeping me company. My hands are resting flat on the cool quartz countertop. Between my hands is a legal document. I just pulled it straight from that brown envelope. It's a crisp, white subpoena from the Florida State Attorney's Office. The official state seal is stamped right at the top left corner. My ex-husband's full name is highlighted in bright fluorescent yellow ink. Langston. I trace my index finger over the black text. The charge listed isn't domestic abuse. It isn't financial fraud. I read the words out loud to the empty room. Attempted murder in the first degree. My hands start shaking. I can feel my pulse pounding violently in my throat. Just saying those words brings a bitter, metallic taste to the back of my mouth. Langston is 75 years old now. He is a frail, aging man living in an assisted facility down in Florida. Most people look at him and see a harmless, quiet grandfather. They are dead wrong. The evidence tells the story. He is a monster who used his 30-year career as a pharmacist to quietly erase me. To understand why I have to fly down there and testify against him, I have to take you back. Exactly 13 years back. We have to go to 2011. I was 58 years old back then. I was a high school Spanish teacher. I told myself the same toxic lie thousands of women tell themselves every single morning. I told myself I was staying in a miserable, controlling marriage to shield my children. I stayed for the kids, but the kids were watching. I remember one specific Tuesday afternoon in October 2011. I had just gotten home from school. I was standing in my old kitchen. I was gripping the edge of the granite countertop so hard my knuckles turned white. A sudden violent wave of dizziness hit me out of nowhere. My knees actually buckled. I caught myself on the edge of the sink. The entire room started spinning like a tilted carousel. I looked out the window above the kitchen sink. The view of our perfectly manicured green lawn started blurring together. The edges of my vision went completely black. I remember a strange smell lingering in the air near his coffee mug. It smelled like crushed chalk and bitter vitamins. I ignored it. I thought it was just exhaustion. I thought I was just stressed from grading midterm exams. I had absolutely no idea my own husband was systematically poisoning me. I wipe a cold bead of sweat off my forehead right now just thinking about it. I look back down at the subpoena on my kitchen island. The paper feels heavy. It feels like 13 years of stolen time and buried secrets. I thought I was protecting my daughter, Ximena. She was just a teenager trying to navigate high school. I tried so hard to hide the ugly, suffocating parts of my marriage from her. But Ximena was paying attention. While I was slowly losing my mind and my physical health, she was watching him. She was noticing the missing pill bottles. She was silently building a criminal case against her own father right under his nose. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but your brain keeps making excuses? I ignored my gut for years. I let the chronic fatigue and the sudden nausea become my normal. I thought I left him to save my soul. I didn't know I was leaving him to save my life. And I wouldn't have known if my 16-year-old daughter hadn't handed me the murder weapon. Topic Chapter 2. I stared at the heavy object resting in my daughter's trembling hands. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't a knife. It was a heavy marble mortar and pestle. The inside bowl was coated in a thick, powdery white residue. She had pulled it out of a hollowed-out AP Calculus textbook. My 16-year-old daughter had been hiding it under her bed. Her knuckles were completely white from gripping it so hard. I touched the white powder with my index finger. My stomach dropped to the floor. It smelled faintly of crushed chalk and bitter vitamins. I looked up at Ximena's face. She had dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a seasoned detective, not a high school junior. To understand how that mortar and pestle got into my daughter's room, we have to go back. The year was 2010. We lived in a 5-bedroom brick colonial in Alpharetta. Langston was the absolute golden boy of our subdivision. He was a respected local pharmacist with 30 years under his belt. He sponsored the local Little League teams. He brought warm donuts to the PTA meetings. Everyone loved Langston. Behind closed doors, my world was quietly collapsing. The symptoms started out of nowhere in late September. I would be standing at the whiteboard in my Spanish classroom. Suddenly, the room would spin violently. The fluorescent lights would blur into a bright, painful smear. I had to grip the metal chalk tray just to stay upright. Then came the terrifying memory gaps. I would find my car keys inside the refrigerator next to the milk. I would forget the names of students I had taught for 3 years. The fatigue was a suffocating, heavy blanket. My limbs felt like they were filled with wet sand. I was absolutely terrified. Langston just smiled his calm, clinical smile. He sat me down at our granite kitchen island. He held both of my hands. He diagnosed me right there in the kitchen. Severe early onset menopause, he said. He told me I needed better nutrition to fight the brain fog. He insisted on making my morning protein shakes himself. Every morning at 6:30, the roar of the blender would wake me up. I would walk down the stairs in my robe. He would slide a tall glass across the counter. It always had a metal straw. His pristine white pharmacist coat would be draped over the dining chair. He looked at me and said, "Gotta manage your macros, Marisol." The shake was always incredibly thick and chalky. It tasted slightly metallic. I drank every single drop. I trusted my husband implicitly. I finally demanded to see a real doctor in November. Langston drove me to a local clinic on Windward Parkway. I sat in the sterile waiting room for an hour. I still have the medical binder from that exact day. I'm looking at the printout right now on my desk. The lab results show completely normal blood work. Every single metric is perfectly within normal range. But at the bottom, there is a handwritten note in blue ink. It just says, "Stress, recommend rest." The signature belongs to Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans was Langston's regular Saturday golfing buddy. They played 18 holes together every single weekend. I felt a deep, burning shame wash over me. I thought I was just weak. I thought I was failing my family. I sat on the cold tile edge of our bathtub. I buried my face in a towel and ugly cried for 40 minutes. I was losing my own mind. I doubted every memory I had. Langston would just pat my shoulder. He would hand me another pill or another thick shake. He was so patient with my decline. Too patient. And while I was losing my mind, my daughter Ximena was losing her childhood watching his every move. Topic Chapter 3. I still have the family photo from Thanksgiving 2010. It sits right here on my desk. The frame is cheap silver metal. If you look closely, you can see the exact moment my daughter stopped being a child. Langston is smiling his perfect, charming smile. He is wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt. His arm is wrapped tightly around my waist. I look completely exhausted. My skin has a sickly yellow tint. There are dark purple bags under my eyes. But Ximena isn't looking at the camera. She is glaring directly at Langston's hands. Her dark eyes are narrowed into tiny slits. Her jaws clenched tight. Her fists are balled up at her sides. That entire fall, Ximena was a ghost in our house. She became completely withdrawn. She would come home from school at 3:15 p.m. She would walk straight past me in the kitchen. I would smell the cafeteria grease on her clothes. Then I would hear the heavy click of her bedroom door locking. She was always glued to her silver iPod Nano. The white earbuds were permanently stuck in her ears. I thought she was just being a typical teenager. I thought she was texting boys or listening to loud music. I stayed for the kids, but the kids were watching, and my kids seemed to hate me. I would stand in the hallway outside Ximena's room. The beige carpet felt rough under my bare feet. The air conditioning vent blew cold air on my neck. I would knock on the white painted wood. I begged her to come out and talk to me. Silence, just the muffled sound of her shuffling things around inside. Sometimes I heard paper rustling. Sometimes I heard the metallic scrape of her window opening. Langston played the role of the benevolent mediator perfectly. He would find me crying on the brown leather sofa. He would sit next to me. He would rub my shoulders with his large, steady hands. His fingers always smelled faintly of clinical soap. "Give her space, Mari," he would whisper. "It's just a phase. Her hormones are all over the place." Then he would walk down the hall to his home office. I would hear the heavy metal clank of his fireproof safe closing. He always kept that gray metal safe locked tight. He claimed it only held boring pharmacy tax documents. I never questioned him. The tension finally snapped 2 weeks before Christmas. It was a Tuesday night. The digital clock on the stove read 7:42 p.m. I had barely managed to stand up from the dining table. The room was spinning again. My stomach was tied in burning knots. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped a fork. It clattered loudly against the tile floor. Ximena stood by the wooden staircase. Her heavy black backpack was slung over one shoulder. I asked her to please help me clear the plates. She dropped her bag on the hardwood floor. It landed with a loud, heavy thud. She looked at me with absolute disgust. "Why do you let him do this to you?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp. I asked her what she was talking about. She stepped closer to me. I could smell the cheap vanilla body spray she wore. "You're so blind," she yelled. Her voice echoed off the high ceiling. She turned and ran up the wooden stairs. Her footsteps pounded like thunder. I heard her bedroom door slam shut. The lock clicked sharply. I leaned back against the cool plaster wall. I felt incredibly dizzy. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor. I sat there on the cold wood and ugly cried. I cried for 40 minutes. My tears soaked the cotton collar of my shirt. My head throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. I felt like a complete failure as a mother. I was enduring a loveless marriage just to give her a stable home, and my reward was her absolute contempt. I didn't understand her anger at all. I thought it was aimed directly at me. I didn't know she was already tracking his movements. I didn't know she was slipping into his home office. I didn't know she was watching him measure out those white powders. She wasn't ignoring me. She was gathering evidence. Every time she locked that door, she was building a case. I thought Ximena was locking her door to keep me out. I didn't realize she was locking it to protect the evidence she was hiding under her mattress. Chapter 4. I finally pulled the mattress back and saw what she was hiding. It wasn't a diary about some boy from school. It was a cheap blue spiral notebook. The wire coil was bent at the top. I opened the cardboard cover. The pages were filled with dates and exact times. My 16-year-old daughter was keeping a meticulous surveillance log. November 12th, 6:00 p.m. Dad locked the office door. November 14th, 6:30 p.m. Heard the gray safe click. She was documenting his every move. She had written down when he went to the pharmacy. She tracked when he took out the kitchen trash. I sat on her carpeted floor and felt completely sick to my stomach. Let me take you back to Thursday afternoon, 2 days before her sweet 16. We were in the living room of our Alpharetta house. I was standing on a metal step stool. I was trying to tape silver streamers to the ceiling molding. My hands were shaking violently. My arms felt like heavy lead weights. My vision kept blurring at the edges. I could hear the blender running in the kitchen. The grinding motor sound made my stomach turn. Langston walked into the living room. He was wearing his perfectly ironed khakis and a blue polo. He held a tall glass with a metal straw. The liquid inside was a thick, pale pink. "Drink this, Marisol," he said. His voice was entirely too calm. "You need your strength for the party." He held the cold glass up to me. Condensation was dripping down the sides. I reached down with a shaky hand. Before my fingers could touch the glass, Ximena walked in. She was wearing her heavy black backpack from school. She smelled like cheap vanilla body spray. She didn't say a word to either of us. She just marched straight toward the metal step stool. She swung her arm hard. It was completely intentional. Her elbows slammed directly into the tall glass. The glass shattered against the hardwood floor. A loud, violent crash echoed in the room. Thick pink liquid splattered across the white baseboards. It seeped deep into the grooves of the oak floorboards. The smell hit the air immediately. It wasn't strawberries or fruit. It smelled intensely of crushed chalk and metallic vitamins. Langston froze. The silence in that living room was absolutely suffocating. I expected him to yell at her for being clumsy. I expected a normal father-daughter argument. That is not what happened. I saw his mask slip, just for a microsecond. His face twisted into pure unmasked rage. His jaw clenched so tight the veins physically popped in his neck. His hands curled into tight fists at his sides. He wasn't looking at the broken glass. He was staring at the spilled pink liquid. What exactly was in that specific smoothie? I didn't know then. But years later, I found a plastic memory box in the attic. I pulled out a handwritten grocery list for the party. Langston had written it on a yellow legal pad. It had normal things like paper plates, napkins, and bags of ice. But at the very bottom, in his neat pharmacist handwriting, was one extra item: mortar and pestle replacement. My blood ran cold when I read those words. He needed a new one, because Ximena had already stolen the heavy marble one. She had taken his primary weapon, so we had to improvise that Thursday afternoon. Back in the living room, my heart was pounding against my ribs. I started apologizing frantically for the mess. I told Ximena to go to the kitchen and get some paper towels. Neither of them moved a single inch. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He looked at the spilled drink like he had just lost hours of hard work. And when I looked up at Ximena, she wasn't acting like a bratty teen. She was staring at him like a soldier. The silence in the living room was deafening. Langston just stared at the pink puddle on the hardwood floor. Ximena stared right back at him. She didn't blink. She looked like a soldier standing her ground. I was completely oblivious to the war happening right in front of me. I grabbed a roll of paper towels from the kitchen. I knelt down and wiped up the thick, chalky sludge. My hands were shaking. I thought they were just having another teenage father blowout. Langston finally turned away. He walked up the wooden staircase without saying a single word. His footsteps echoed in the quiet house. 2 days later, it was Saturday night. Ximena's Sweet 16. Our Alpharetta brick colonial was packed with 50 teenagers. The bass from the speakers rattled the living room windows. Silver streamers hung from the ceiling fans. The whole house smelled like cheap vanilla body spray and warm pizza. I was carrying a tray of pizza rolls toward the dining table. I was exhausted. I thought Ximena was just being a rebellious teenager. I thought her recent distance was because she hated me. I thought she wanted her parents to divorce. I was so incredibly wrong. I felt a cold hand grab my wrist. It was Ximena. Her grip was tight. It actually hurt. She didn't say a word to me. She just pulled me down the hallway away from the music. We stepped into the laundry room. She slammed the door shut behind us. She reached up and flipped the brass deadbolt. The loud bass from the party instantly muffled. The room was suffocatingly quiet. The washing machine hummed softly in the corner. The air smelled like fresh linen detergent. Ximena looked me dead in the eye. Her face was completely pale. "Mom, you have to leave tonight," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I know what he's putting in your food." My stomach dropped to the floor. The fluorescent light above us flickered. I couldn't process what she was saying. Then she reached into her pocket. She pulled out her silver iPod Nano. This was it. This was the secret she had been hiding under her mattress. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't a stash of stolen cigarettes. It was a criminal case file. She tapped the tiny screen. She held the device up to my face. The glare lit up the dark laundry room. It was a video. The footage was grainy and dark. It was recorded from the perspective of our kitchen pantry. The camera was peeking through a slightly opened pantry door. Through the crack, I could see our kitchen island. The timestamp in the bottom corner read October 14th, 2011. The time was exactly 06:15 a.m. There was Langston. He was wearing his white pharmacist coat. He was getting ready for work. He was standing right at my kitchen counter. He was holding that heavy marble mortar and pestle. I watched my husband empty 4 distinct capsules into the marble bowl. He ground them down with terrifying precision. The powder was stark white against the dark stone. He scraped the residue out with a metal spoon. Then he dumped the powder directly into my coffee mug. It was my specific mug, the one with the painted yellow sunflowers. He poured hot black coffee over the white powder. He stirred it slowly. He stirred it until the poison completely dissolved. I felt the bile rise in my throat. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. My knees actually buckled beneath me. I had to lean hard against the cold metal of the dryer to stay standing. 22 years of marriage. All of it a lie. Every morning he handed me that mug with a smile. Every morning he kissed my cheek. My own daughter had been playing detective in her own home. She had been acting distant to avoid his suspicion. She was documenting his crimes. She was protecting me, while I thought she was just pulling away. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the tiny screen, my whole reality collapsing. But then Ximena swiped to the next photo, and I realized the poison wasn't even the worst part of his plan. I thought seeing my husband poison my coffee was the bottom of the nightmare. I was wrong. We were still standing in the cramped laundry room. The washing machine vibrated violently against my hip. The smell of cheap vanilla body spray hung heavy in the air. Ximena's thumb hovered over the silver click wheel of the iPod. My hands were ice cold. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my throat. She swiped to the right. The tiny screen flickered to a new image. It was a photograph of a legal document. I squinted at the glowing rectangular screen. The text was dense and formal. At the very top, in bold black letters, it read, "Durable Power of Attorney." Right beneath that was my full legal name. I looked up at my 16-year-old daughter. She whispered, "I found it in the gray safe." I felt the air completely leave my lungs. Langston kept that heavy fireproof box tucked under his home office desk. He always told me it was strictly for pharmacy tax records. He said it was boring legal paperwork, but Ximena had guessed his combination. She tried his old college fraternity chapter number. It couldn't open. I took the iPod from her shaking hands. I zoomed in on the pixelated text. Langston was naming himself my sole conservator. He was establishing total, irrevocable control over my entire estate. Ximena reached over and swiped to the next photo. It was a typed list. A fully translated, itemized inventory of my family's land deeds in Bolivia. My mind violently snapped back to a Sunday dinner 6 months earlier. We were sitting around the dining table. The chandelier light was reflecting off the good china. Langston was casually swirling a glass of expensive red wine. He was talking to my brother, Mateo. He leaned forward and asked a very specific question about foreign land taxes. He wanted to know how property transfers worked in South America. I thought he was just making polite conversation. My stomach twisted into a tight, sickening knot. He wasn't making conversation. He was doing financial reconnaissance. Ximena swiped the screen one more time. The third photo showed a thick, heavy medical textbook. It was lying open on his mahogany desk. A bright yellow sticky note marked a specific page. I zoomed in on the text. The chapter heading read, "Chemically Induced Dementia." The words blurred together, my eyes filled with hot tears. Suddenly, the daily protein shakes made perfect, horrifying sense. Every single morning, Langston insisted on making my breakfast. He said he was carefully managing my macros. He would hand me a tall glass with a metal straw. The liquid was always thick and heavily textured. That gritty texture of the protein powder had a sinister purpose. It was perfectly masking the bitter, chalky taste of crushed amycryptoline and digitalis. He wasn't just trying to make me physically sick. He was systematically destroying my cognitive function. He was manufacturing a mental decline, one morning at a time. You know that feeling when the floor completely drops out from under your life? The brilliance of his plan chilled me to the bone. If I died suddenly, there would automatically be an autopsy. A healthy 45-year-old woman dropping dead triggers a police investigation. But a tragic early onset dementia diagnosis? That just brings casseroles and neighborhood sympathy, and it brings total financial control to the grieving, devoted husband. He was going to lock me inside my own mind. He was going to slowly steal my family's legacy. I looked up from the tiny silver screen. Ximena was staring at me. Her dark eyes were wide and completely terrified. She had carried this massive secret all by herself. It was Saturday night. Bass from the living room speakers vibrated through the solid wooden door. 50 teenagers were currently dancing in my house. Langston was out there right now playing the perfect host to the other parents. We had to leave. We had to get out of this house tonight. But we couldn't just walk out the front door. He didn't want me dead. A dead wife brings police. A wife with early onset dementia brings sympathy and total financial control. We had to run, but we were trapped in a house full of his friends. We had 50 guests drinking expensive wine in our living room. They were laughing and eating crab cakes. Meanwhile, my husband was actively planning to erase my brain. We were still locked inside the cramped laundry room. The washing machine was running a heavy spin cycle. It vibrated violently against my spine. I couldn't catch my breath. The air smelled strongly of artificial lavender detergent. Ximena grabbed both of my shoulders. Her fingernails dug into my skin. Her grip was shockingly strong for a teenager. She looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "We are leaving right now." Panic flooded my chest. I reached frantically into my cardigan pocket. I pulled out my Honda car keys. Ximena immediately shook her head. She snatched my iPhone right out of my left hand. She quickly unlocked my home screen. She swiped to a hidden folder on the second page. She tapped an icon I had never noticed before. She held the glowing display up to my face. It was a family tracking app. The screen showed a pulsing blue dot directly over our Alpharetta address. The settings text at the bottom read, "Location updated every 5 minutes." My blood ran completely cold. Langston had installed it months ago under the guise of safety. He told me it was just in case my car broke down. I believed him. It was never about safety. It was a digital leash. He was tracking my every single move. We slipped quietly out of the laundry room. We crept into the empty kitchen. The hired caterers were all busy out in the dining room. Ximena placed my phone gently on the cold granite kitchen counter. "Leave it," she whispered. "He'll follow the ping." I stared at the dark screen, resting next to the sink. Walking away from that phone felt like stepping off a cliff. It was a liberating, terrifying weightlessness. I was severing my connection to my entire life. We hurried out of the kitchen and down the long hallway. The party had moved down to the massive finished basement. We ducked quickly into the first-floor guest bedroom. I pushed the solid wooden door shut. I turned the brass lock with a sharp click. Suddenly, the pop music downstairs cut out completely. A microphone whined with a sharp, high-pitched feedback. Then came Langston's booming, charismatic voice. It echoed clearly right through the floorboards. "Can I get everyone's attention?" he asked smoothly. The massive crowd downstairs murmured and quickly quieted down. 16 years ago today, God gave me a perfect little girl. My stomach violently turned over. I tasted bitter bile in the back of my throat. I grabbed 2 black plastic garbage bags from the hall closet. My hands were shaking so uncontrollably I could barely open them. We didn't pack clothes or toothbrushes. We packed pure survival. I shoved my heavy medical binder deep into the plastic bag. Ximena tossed in the silver iPod Nano. She wrapped the heavy marble mortar in a gray towel. She dropped it into the bag. I pulled my navy blue U.S. passport from the nightstand drawer. I folded it in half. I shoved it straight down into my bra. The stiff cardboard scratched sharply against my bare skin. It was a terrifying, surreal feeling. I was hiding travel documents like a fugitive in my own home. Downstairs, the crowd erupted into loud applause. Langston was playing the role of the perfect, loving father flawlessly. I could hear crystal glasses clinking together in a massive toast. He was drinking to her health. He was actively poisoning her mother. Ximena unlatched the guest bedroom window lock. She pushed the heavy glass sash upward with both hands. A sudden blast of cold October air hit my sweating face. It smelled sharply of damp pine needles and wet dirt. Ximena went out first. She tossed our 2 garbage bags quietly onto the lawn. Then she swung her denim-clad legs over the white wooden sill. I watched her drop silently into the dark azalea bushes below. My turn. I hiked up my long floral skirt. I climbed awkwardly onto the window ledge. My bare knee scraped hard against the sharp metal track. A thin line of blood welled up on my skin. I didn't even care about the stinging pain. I dropped down into the cold, wet pine straw beside my daughter. We stayed crouched low in the deep shadows. We sprinted frantically across the dark lawn. The manicured grass was slick with evening dew. My chest heaved violently with every single breath. We reached the edge of our sprawling subdivision. We slipped through the backyard and into a waiting cabin Ximena had paid for in cash. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house. The lights were on, the music was playing, and my husband had no idea his lab rat had just escaped the maze. The cab tires hummed against the asphalt of Interstate 75. We were heading north, straight into the pitch-black Tennessee night. My hands were still clutching that heavy manila envelope. The silver iPod Nano was burning a hole in my cardigan pocket. The adrenaline began to drain out of my system. It felt like icy water rushing down my spine. My vision blurred. The dashboard lights of the cab smeared into bright, stabbing streaks. The poison was still in my blood. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 2 hours later, the cab dropped us off in Chattanooga. It was a cinderblock building called the Starlight Motel. The neon sign buzz flickering pink against the damp pavement. Ximena walked right up to the bulletproof glass at the front desk. She slapped down a stack of crumpled 20s. I still have that faded receipt in my file today. It was paid entirely in cash. The name printed at the top was Mariah Lopez. Ximena had invented a fake name without even blinking. Room 114 smelled like stale cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. The carpet was a sticky dark brown. Ximena locked the brass deadbolt. She slid the metal chain into place. We collapsed onto the stiff floral bedspreads without taking our shoes off. The next 14 days were a living nightmare. I went through a brutal, unmedicated physical withdrawal. The amycryptoline and digitalis were fighting to stay in my system. I spent the first 3 days shivering on the cracked bathroom tiles. My skin was slick with cold, clammy sweat. My muscles cramped so hard I screamed into a rolled-up towel. I vomited until my throat tasted like copper. Ximena sat on the edge of the porcelain bathtub. She pressed damp, gray washcloths to my forehead. She forced me to sip tap water from a flimsy plastic cup. I felt like my body was tearing itself apart. But I wasn't dying. I was finally waking up. It happened on day 5. I woke up to harsh morning sunlight streaming through the cheap motel blinds. I sat up on the edge of the lumpy mattress. I held my breath. I waited for the room to spin. It didn't. I stood up on my own 2 feet. I didn't have to press my hand against the drywall to keep my balance. The crushing brain fog was completely gone. The heavy, suffocating weight in my skull had vanished entirely. I could remember dates, names, and conversations with crystal clarity. My brain wasn't broken. I wasn't losing my mind. I was just poisoned. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. The terror I had been carrying for over a year evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a hot, righteous fury. I looked at Ximena. She was sleeping in the other bed, clutching her heavy black backpack. I knew exactly what we had to do next. By the end of the 2nd week, we hired a family law attorney in downtown Chattanooga. We sat in a sterile conference room with a massive mahogany table. We filed for an emergency protective order. We handed over the silver iPod Nano. We showed them the translated Bolivian land deeds. We placed the heavy marble mortar and pestle right on the glass table. Langston didn't even try to contact us directly. He knew that tracking app was just pinging a decoy phone in an empty kitchen. Instead, he lawyered up immediately. His attorney filed an aggressive response within 48 hours. They claimed I was experiencing a severe mental health crisis. They claimed I had kidnapped our teenage daughter. I wasn't scared. We had the video. We had the medical binder. We had the physical evidence. I thought the hard part was over. I thought the justice system would see the video, see the documents, and lock him away. I forgot one crucial detail. Langston was a wealthy, white, connected man in a southern suburb. Topic Chapter 9. I walked into the Fulton County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning. The marble floors echoed under my cheap black pumps. I was clutching a heavy manila envelope to my chest. Inside was the silver iPod Nano. It also held the translated Bolivian land deeds. I thought the truth was enough. I was so incredibly naive. We sat at the heavy mahogany plaintiff's table. The wood felt cold under my sweating palms. Langston sat 20 feet away at the defense table. He wasn't wearing his white pharmacist coat today. He wore a custom navy suit that cost more than my car. He looked like a devastated, abandoned husband. He even forced a single tear when the judge walked in. He dabbed his eye with a pressed white handkerchief. My hands were shaking. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My lawyer plugged a laptop into the courtroom monitors. He played the video from the silver iPod. The timestamp showed October 14, 2011, exactly 06:15 a.m. The screen lit up the dim courtroom. There was Langston standing at our cold granite kitchen counter. He was pouring white powder into my painted yellow sunflower mug. I held my breath, waiting for the judge to order his arrest. Instead, Langston's high-priced defense attorney stood up. He smoothed his silk tie and smiled at the bench. He argued the video was hopelessly grainy. He said there was no clear chain of custody. He told the judge Langston was a licensed medical professional. He claimed Langston was simply mixing my prescribed vitamin supplements. Vitamins to help with my deteriorating mental state. The attorney handed the judge a thick stack of medical records. They were the lab results from Dr. Evans, Langston's golf buddy. The papers documented my paranoia and confusion. The attorney pointed right at me. He said I was hallucinating plots against my life. I felt the cold air conditioning blast through my thin cardigan. I tried to speak, but my lawyer squeezed my wrist hard. The judge looked down at me over his wire-rimmed reading glasses. He didn't see a victim. He saw a hysterical woman going through a severe mental health crisis. I have the official court filing right here in my hand. It is 3 pages of dense legal jargon. I keep it in a plastic sleeve in my desk drawer. Look at the second page right here in the middle. I circled one word in thick red ink. Inconclusive. The judge denied the emergency protective order. He dismissed the poisoning claims entirely. He called my evidence a product of severe hysteria. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't pull in a breath. Then came the absolute worst part. Lisa's attorney brought up Ximena. He accused me of kidnapping a minor across state lines. He demanded full custody to protect her from my delusions. The gavel slammed down against the wooden block. Court was adjourned. I stumbled out into the bright fluorescent hallway. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I leaned against the cool plaster to steady my shaking legs. That is when Langston walked past me. His lawyer was a few steps ahead, talking on a cell phone. The bailiff was looking the exact opposite way. Langston stopped right in front of me. I could smell his expensive cedar cologne. He adjusted his silk tie. He gave me this small, predatory smile, and then he winked at me. A slow, deliberate wink. My blood ran completely cold. He knew he had won. He had bought the truth. I walked out of those heavy glass courthouse doors in a daze. The Georgia heat hit me like a physical blow. I had brought them the heavy marble mortar and pestle. I had brought them the video evidence. It meant absolutely nothing against a man with a country club membership. The judge didn't just dismiss the criminal charges. Because Ximena was only 16, he ordered shared custody. My daughter had to go back to the house of the man who tried to destroy my brain. I stood on those courthouse steps with the Tuesday morning sun beating down on my neck. The judge's ink was barely dry on the shared custody order. My 16-year-old daughter was legally mandated to return to the man who tried to erase my mind. The Georgia heat felt suffocating. I gripped the heavy manila envelope containing the ruling. My knuckles were completely white. I felt physically sick. That Friday afternoon, I drove Ximena back to the Alpharetta Brick Colonial. I parked my Honda at the end of the long driveway. The azalea bushes were in full bloom. It looked like a picture-perfect suburban home. My stomach was in absolute knots. I felt like I was feeding my child to a monster. I turned to her in the passenger seat. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I told her we could just drive away. I told her I would risk the kidnapping charge. I didn't care anymore. Ximena just unbuckled her seatbelt. She looked at me with a chilling, deadpan expression. She said, "Mom, stop. I'm not going in there to bond." I didn't understand what she meant. She grabbed her heavy black backpack from the floorboard. She slammed the car door and marched up the front steps. Langston was incredibly arrogant. He had his pristine reputation and his expensive custom suits. He thought he had completely broken us. He stopped locking the gray fireproof safe. Because he thought he won, he got sloppy. He left his laptop open on his mahogany desk. The following Saturday morning, I was sitting at my tiny apartment kitchen table. It was exactly 9:14 a.m. My phone buzzed against the cold Formica counter. It was a text from Ximena. The message read, "He's golfing. I'm in." My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. I typed back with shaking fingers. I wrote, "Please get out of there. It's too dangerous." 3 agonizing hours passed. I paced the length of my tiny living room until the floorboards creaked. I imagined him coming home early. I pictured him catching her in his office. Finally, my screen lit up. She was safe. Sunday evening, I picked her up and we drove straight to a diner on Highway 9. We sat in a sticky vinyl booth in the back corner. The smell of frying grease and stale coffee hung heavy in the air. Ximena didn't say a word at first. She just reached into her floral skirt pocket. She placed a small silver USB drive onto the table. It landed right next to the glass sugar dispenser with a soft click. I stared at it. Her hands were shaking slightly. Awe and maternal terror hit me at the exact same time. My little girl wasn't just surviving him. She was actively acting as a mole inside his house. She had bypassed the lock on his home office door. She had copied his entire hard drive. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but you still have to look? That's where I was. We didn't even order food. I threw 2 crumpled 20s on the table. We left the diner and drove straight to the public library. It was almost closing time. We walked into the sterile computer lab in the basement. The fluorescent lights hummed loudly above us. We sat down at a sticky keyboard in the very back row. I took a deep breath. I slid the silver flash drive into the computer tower. A folder popped up on the dusty monitor. It was labeled Patient Profiles. I clicked it. There were dozens of subfolders. They were organized by year, going all the way back to 1998. We plugged that flash drive into a library computer. And that's when we realized I wasn't Langston's first clinical trial. I was just the first one who survived. I clicked the first digital folder on the tiny silver USB drive. It was labeled Patient 0M. That was me. My hands went completely numb. The screen filled with an Excel spreadsheet. It wasn't a diary, it was a clinical trial ledger. Column A listed the date. Column B listed my exact weight. Column C tracked my sleep hours down to the minute. Column D was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. It was labeled Confusion Index. He graded my cognitive decline on a scale of 1 to 10. Column E listed the exact milligrams of amitriptyline and digitalis. The evidence tells the story. He wasn't trying to kill me. Death would trigger an autopsy. Death would trigger a police investigation. He wanted me alive, but entirely hollowed out. I thought back to that locked gray fireproof metal safe in his home office. He always told me it held boring pharmacy tax documents. It didn't. We already knew what was inside. The power of attorney paperwork. The translated inventory of my family's land deeds in Bolivia. He was inducing early onset dementia to gain total legal control of my generational wealth. He was going to lock me in a facility using my own money. Then he would sell off every acre my grandfather ever owned. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I clicked the back arrow on the dusty monitor. There were other folders, dozens of them dating all the way back to 1998. I opened a folder labeled Subject 2C. Her name was Catherine. She was his girlfriend before we met. The spreadsheet format was identical. Milligrams administered. Symptoms observed. I opened another folder labeled Subject 4E. Elena, another ex-girlfriend from 2004. I remembered meeting Elena once at a pharmacy Christmas party. It was December 2004. We were standing by the crystal punch bowl. Her hands were shaking so violently, she spilled hot tea down her floral skirt. I remember looking over at Langston. He wasn't helping her. He was just watching her with cold clinical interest. Both Catherine and Elena died of sudden neurological complications. He didn't start with me. I was just the first one who survived his dosage miscalculations. I couldn't breathe. The sterile computer lab suddenly felt like a tomb. I pulled the silver USB drive from the sticky keyboard. I looked at Ximena. She was sitting in the plastic chair beside me, perfectly still. I stayed for the kids, but the kids were watching. And my 16-year-old kid had just uncovered a prolific serial killer. We didn't go back to the local police. The drive down Interstate 285 took 45 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. We drove straight to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation field office. It was a massive brick building in Decatur. The air conditioning inside blasted my face as we walked through the heavy glass doors. We sat in a sterile conference room. The table was cold metal. I handed the silver drive to a lead investigator named Agent Darnell. I explained the spreadsheets. I explained the power of attorney documents. I showed him the video on the silver iPod Nano. Agent Darnell didn't blink. He just slid the drive into a plastic evidence bag. He sealed it with bright red tape. He told us they were opening a full criminal investigation immediately. He said they had enough to raid Langston's pharmacy by morning. I finally felt a massive weight lift off my chest. We had him. The nightmare was finally over. At least, that is what I thought. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but your brain keeps making excuses? I should have known Langston's roots in that southern suburb ran too deep. I should have known a wealthy pharmacist plays golf with the right people. 3 days passed. No raid happened. No arrest warrant was issued. Instead, on Thursday morning, I drove past his Windward Parkway clinic. There was a massive sold sign staked into the front lawn. I panicked. I drove straight to the Alpharetta Brick Colonial. I parked my Honda on the street. I ran up the concrete driveway. A gray real estate lockbox hung on the brass deadbolt. The windows were dark. The driveway was completely empty. The GBI took the drive. They opened an investigation, but Langston must have had a friend in the department, because in less than 72 hours, he liquidated his entire life. Gone. Just like that, he vanished. Topic Chapter 12. He was gone. just erased from the earth. I stood in front of that massive sold sign on the lawn. The gray real estate lockbox hung on the front door like a tombstone. My hands were completely numb. I could feel the cold plastic of the USB drive inside my purse. I had the clinical trial spreadsheets. I had the patient profiles spanning 2 decades. But you cannot prosecute a ghost. I took the drive to the GBI field office in Decatur anyway. I handed it to Agent Darnell across a cold metal table. He looked at the files. His face went completely pale. But Langston was already in the wind. The first year was pure, suffocating paranoia. Every time a dark sedan turned onto my street, my chest tightened. I moved into a small, secure condo on the 2nd floor. I checked the brass deadbolt 3 times every single night. I kept a heavy wooden baseball bat under my bed. I woke up at 3 in the morning, listening to the silence, but the days slowly turned into months. The months turned into years. The divorce went through an abstantia. A tired judge in a Fulton County courtroom stamped the final decree. Langston didn't contest it. He didn't show up. His expensive lawyer stood at the mahogany table and shrugged. He said his client had completely severed contact. We figured Langston took his liquidated cash and fled to Bolivia. Or maybe he was dead. Either way, we were finally safe. Ximena didn't let the trauma break her. She used it as fuel. My sweet, brilliant girl went to college. She didn't study medicine. She didn't study law. She chose forensic accounting. She had spent her teenage years tracking her father's hidden movements. Now she was learning how to track hidden money professionally. I have a photo from her graduation day. It sits in a silver frame on the mantle in my living room. The Georgia sun is shining bright behind her. She is wearing a black cap and gown. She is holding her accounting degree with both hands, and she is smiling. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on her face since she was 15. The heavy darkness behind her brown eyes was finally gone. We started to heal. The trauma faded into a dull, itchy scar. By 2019, I was teaching Spanish tutoring sessions from my kitchen table. The phantom smell of crushed chalk and vitamins was finally out of my nose. One sunny afternoon in May, Ximena came over to the condo. We walked into my spare bedroom. There were 3 heavy cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. They held all the old legal filings and custody orders. Ximena looked at the boxes, looked at me, and nodded. We carried those heavy boxes down the carpeted hallway. We took them out to the alley behind my building. I opened the lid of the big blue recycling bin. We tossed the thick manila folders inside, one by one. The paper hit the plastic bottom with a hollow thud. It felt like exhaling for the first time in a decade. I wiped the cardboard dust off my hands. We went back upstairs and made chicken enchiladas for dinner. Life became remarkably ordinary. I bought new coffee mugs for the condo. None of them had painted yellow sunflowers. I drank my morning coffee black, standing by the glass balcony door. I never worried about a bitter taste. I never worried about a gritty texture. Mena got a job at a top financial firm in downtown Atlanta. She bought her own place in Midtown. We had Sunday dinners. We took vacations to the beach. 10 years passed in the shadows. A whole decade of quiet, boring, beautiful peace. I stopped looking over my shoulder at the grocery store. I stopped checking the caller ID when the phone rang. We really believed we had outlived the nightmare. We thought the story was over, but that is the absolute danger of peace. It makes you soft. It makes you forget the exact shape of the monster in the dark. Langston wasn't hiding in South America. He wasn't dead. He hadn't stopped his clinical trials. We let our guard down. We thought the monster was gone. But monsters don't retire. They just move to Florida and find new patients. The knock on my front door came at exactly 2014 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember looking at the green digital numbers on my microwave clock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my wet hands on a kitchen towel. I walked down the short hallway to the front door. I leaned in and looked through the brass peephole. A man in a dark gray suit was standing on my porch. He was holding a black leather badge wallet open against his chest. The bright Georgia afternoon sun was completely silhouetted in his broad shoulders. I opened the heavy wooden door. The humid summer air rushed into my air-conditioned living room. He looked at me with tired eyes. He said, "Marisol?" "I'm Detective Darnell. I'm with the Florida State Attorney's Office." My chest tightened so fast it hurt. I hadn't heard a word from Florida law enforcement since that subpoena arrived months ago. I stepped back and led him into my living room. We walked over and sat down at my small oak dining table. The apartment was dead silent. He unlatched his leather briefcase. He reached inside and pulled out a silver iPad. He slid it across the polished wood right toward me. The screen was already lit up. It was a digital news clipping from a Tampa newspaper. The headline was bolded in thick black ink. It read, "Local retiree mourns, tragic loss of wife to rare dementia." I felt the blood drain completely from my face. My hands started shaking. I recognized the man in the grainy photograph instantly. It was Langston. He looked older. His hair was completely white now. He was standing in front of a sprawling Florida estate looking perfectly devastated. Detective Darnell leaned forward. The wooden chair creaked under his weight. He said, "Her name was Patricia. She was 68 years old." He paused. He said, "She died 3 weeks ago. The coroner listed the cause as sudden neurological complications." Have you ever felt your blood freeze and boil at the exact same second? I couldn't breathe. My fingernails dug into the edge of the oak table. He did it. He actually did it. He found another wealthy woman in Florida. He gained her trust. He mixed his white powders. He fed her those capsules in thick protein shakes. But this time, there was no 16-year-old daughter hiding under a mattress. There was no one to steal his heavy marble mortar and pestle. This time he finished the job. I looked back up at the detective. I asked him how he found me. Darnell smiled grimly. He said, "We didn't find you. Your daughter found us." Ximena had been tracking Langston's financial footprint for years. Her forensic accounting degree wasn't just a career choice. It was a hunting license. She had spent the last decade tearing apart shell companies and offshore accounts. She finally flagged a massive transfer of assets in Tampa. Millions of dollars moved from a private trust straight into Langston's personal accounts. Ximena compiled a 70-page dossier. She sent it directly to the Florida state attorney. That dossier was what triggered the subpoena I received. Darnell tapped the iPad screen with his index finger. He said, "Langston thinks he got away with it." He said, "He thinks Patricia's death looks perfectly natural to the local cops." Darnell locked eyes with me. He said, "He filed the life insurance claim yesterday." I stared Langston's smug face on the bright screen. The phantom scent of crushed chalk suddenly filled my nose. I remembered the pink puddle of poison smoothie on my old kitchen floor. I remembered the cold granite counter. Darnell folded his hands on my table. He said they had enough financial evidence to arrest Langston for fraud, but they wanted attempted murder for me and first-degree murder for Patricia. He said, "To prove murder, we need to prove a pattern." He said, "We need to show he's done this before." I stood up from the table. My knees popped in the quiet room. I walked straight to my hallway closet. I reached up to the top shelf. I pulled down a heavy gray fireproof lockbox. I carried it back to the dining table and set it down hard. I unlocked it with a small brass key. I reached inside and pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside that bag was a small silver USB drive. It was the exact same drive Ximena had loaded with Langston's patient profiles 13 years ago. The one with all the clinical trial ledgers. The exact milligrams of amitriptyline and digitalis. The complete history of his crimes dating back to 1998. Darnell didn't just want my testimony. He wanted Ximena's hard drive. The evidence the Georgia judge called inconclusive was about to become Exhibit A in a Florida murder trial. I handed Detective Darnell that small silver USB drive on a Tuesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, I was sitting on a Delta flight to Tampa. I stared out the oval window at the white clouds. My hands were resting flat and calm on my lap. The Florida state attorney didn't waste a single second. They had everything they needed for a first-degree murder charge, plus an attempted murder charge for what he did to me. I walked into the Tampa legal deposition room at exactly 9 a.m. The air conditioning in the building was absolutely freezing. There was a massive mahogany table sitting in the center of the room. 4 black leather chairs were positioned on each side. I sat down in the second chair on the right. My palms were sweating against my dark gray skirt. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I hadn't seen my ex-husband in 13 long years. The heavy wooden door finally clicked open. I braced myself. Langston walked in. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I expected the terrifying giant from our old Alpharetta kitchen. I had a sudden flash of him towering over that spilled pink smoothie. I remembered the pure rage in his eyes that morning. Instead, a frail 75-year-old man shuffled into the room. He was leaning heavily on a black metal cane. He wore a beige cardigan that looked 2 sizes too big. His shoulders were severely hunched. He was playing the victim perfectly. He looked like a harmless, confused grandfather. He didn't even look at me when he sat down across the table. His expensive defense lawyer slapped a thick stack of medical records down. The lawyer smoothed his silk tie and cleared his throat. They were ready to argue his complete innocence. They were ready to blame Patricia's death on sudden heart failure, just like they legally blamed my cognitive decline on severe stress. The lead Florida prosecutor didn't say a single word to them. He just reached over and tapped his laptop keyboard. A bright projector screen hummed to life on the back wall. The cooling fan inside the projector whirred loudly in the quiet room. The first image appeared on the bright white canvas. It was Ximena's 70-page financial dossier. Every single hidden bank account in Tampa was highlighted in neon yellow. The massive transfer of assets was documented down to the penny. Langston's head snapped up instantly. His posture went completely rigid. The frail grandfather act vanished in a split second. The prosecutor tapped the keyboard a second time. The screen changed to the clinical trial ledger from the USB drive. The exact milligrams of amitriptyline and digitalis were listed in neat rows. His secret patient profiles from 1998 to present day were displayed. Catherine, Elena, me, Patricia. The confusion index columns were right there in black and white. I watched Langston's hands start to visibly tremble. It wasn't a tremor from old age or weakness. It was pure, unadulterated panic. He gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table. His knuckles turned completely white against the dark wood. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The prosecutor clicked a video file on his desktop. It was the raw footage from Ximena's silver iPod Nano. The timestamp flashed in the corner, October 14th, 2011. 6:15 a.m. The grainy, low-resolution video filled the massive screen. There was Langston, 13 years younger and full of arrogant confidence. He was standing in our old Alpharetta kitchen. The audio kicked in. We could all hear the sharp clink of a metal spoon. He was methodically measuring white powder into my painted yellow sunflower mug. The silence in that deposition room was suffocating. The security camera in the ceiling corner captured his exact reaction. Langston physically slumped down deep into his leather chair. His chest was heaving under that oversized cardigan. His icy blue eyes darted frantically around the sterile room. He finally looked away from the projector screen. He stared directly across the table at me. I saw the exact moment his ego completely shattered. He realized what he was looking at. He recognized the low angle of the video footage. It was taken from the metal step stool in the kitchen pantry. He knew I was deeply asleep in the master bedroom when that was filmed. There was only one other person living in that house. It wasn't a team of highly trained GBI agents who caught him. It wasn't a seasoned detective who cracked his clinical trials. It was the teenage daughter he completely ignored. It was the girl he thought was just locked in her room being moody. She had systematically dismantled his entire 30-year criminal career. She built a bulletproof case right under his arrogant nose. The air in the room felt completely still. My heart beat steadily and calmly against my ribs. I felt a profound, untouchable sense of power washing over me. He looked at me, his icy blue eyes completely hollow, and whispered, "She was just a kid." And I finally got to say the words I'd waited 13 years to say. He looked up from that heavy mahogany table. His eyes were completely hollow. The projector screen behind me was still glowing. It showed his 13-year-old clinical trial ledger. His hands were shaking against the polished wood. He leaned forward. He whispered, "She was just a kid." I leaned in closer. I could smell the stale, bitter coffee on his breath. I looked right into his eyes. I said, "She was a kid, but she was my kid." I watched the last bit of arrogance drain out of his face. His shoulders collapsed. He slumped back into his black leather chair. He looked like a deflated, pathetic old man. The deposition ended 3 minutes later. Agent Darnell walked into the room. He brought 2 Tampa police officers with him. The metal handcuffs clicked loudly in the quiet room. The sound echoed off the bare walls. Langston didn't even fight it. He just stared at Ximena's 70-page financial dossier on the table. He knew the Florida prosecutors had him dead to rights. He thought he was the smartest man in every room. But he was trapped. He took a plea deal exactly 3 weeks later. He pled guilty to first-degree murder for Patricia. He pled guilty to attempted murder for me. He only did it to avoid the death penalty. Langston will spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell. He will die in a Florida state prison. I am sitting in my kitchen back in Alpharetta right now. The morning sun is hitting the cold granite counter. My coffee is sitting in a plain white ceramic mug. I threw out every painted sunflower mug 13 years ago. The coffee is black. There is no thick, chalky residue at the bottom. I think a lot about the lie mothers tell themselves. We say we stay for the kids. We endure the abuse to keep the family intact. I swallow those bitter protein shakes every morning to keep the peace. I thought I was shielding Ximena from a broken home. My mind always goes back to that tiny laundry room in 2011. I can still hear the washing machine humming. I can still feel Ximena pulling me inside by my cardigan. She was just 16 years old. She smelled like cheap vanilla body spray, but her eyes were completely terrified. She handed me that heavy marble mortar and pestle. I can still feel the cold stone in my hands. I remember seeing the white powdery residue clinging to the bowl. That was the exact moment my whole world shattered. I thought I was protecting my daughter, but my daughter was the one protecting me. She had to grow up way too fast. She became a detective in her own home just to keep me alive. I keep a specific photograph right here on my kitchen island. I'm holding it right now. It is a vibrant, glossy print in a simple wooden frame. It was taken last month. I'm 71. Ximena is 29. We are both smiling so hard our eyes are crinkled. Behind us are the green mountains of Bolivia. We are standing on the exact family land Langston tried to steal. He wanted to sell it to fund his twisted retirement. Instead, Ximena and I built a small clinic on that soil. We used the settlement money from his seized assets. Ximena's forensic accounting degree is hanging on the wall right behind me. Justice has a very specific kind of peace. It feels light in your chest. If you are staying in a toxic house because you think the kids don't know, trust me, they know. And if you're lucky, they might just be brave enough to pull you out. I am sharing this because I know someone out there needs to hear it. If this story hit you, drop a like on this video. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more. Make sure you turn on notifications. You do not want to miss a thing. I want to know where you are watching this from right now. What time is it there? Drop a comment down below and tell me I read every single one of them. Stay safe and listen to your daughters.